Thank you, thank you, thank you, Alice. I love you, girl. So glad you came out to God's country. I'm joking. California's sort of crazy country. Hey, everybody. I see. I'm Pat. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm so happy to be here. I get excited about this when I got to tell you, when Alice said, "Hey, pick a topic, send me the deal." Alice didn't respond right away when I sent it back to her. She's going, I think you're probably going, what are you going to talk on that for? No? Okay, good. But this is, here's the good news. This is not a library tour, okay? It's not a library tour today, but I do want to, I'll probably mention some stuff. And out of the gate, I want to sort of set the stage on why we're doing, why I'm so passionate about this. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous in 2002, God struck me sober in July of 2002. So I just passed 22 years, and it's a miracle of God. It is an absolute miracle of God. I take no credit, none. And when I came in, I didn't want to hear from you to tell me about God. I'd given up on God in my life. I literally had given up on God. And so when I saw it up on the steps in that third step, I was going, wait a minute, is this thing all about God? And as I went through the first 3 or 4 months, I'm going to spare the deal so I can get right into our topic. I was going down fast. I was up for 2 breaths and I was going down and I was coming back up for the third breath in sobriety. I'm 3 months sober. I don't have a solution. I'm in a group that knows the solution in Denver, Colorado. But I was so anti-God, it was like I couldn't get there. I could not get there. But I got this gift of desperation that's never, well, I got it before I came in here, but I had this gift of desperation that there's no other way. I'm an alcoholic. When I drink, I can't control the amount. When I'm not drinking, I can't control the start. And I have a spiritual malady that is literally trying to kill me from the inside out. I have a spiritual cancer that is silent and ever so deadly. And the only solution is a conscious relationship with the living God of the universe that indeed is the great miracle, the great fact, and the central fact of page 25. It truly is. And my relationship with God today is far different than it was 22 years ago. And I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about the pilgrimage of how I've gotten to where I've gotten. And by the way, I'm a journeyman. I'm on the trail, and I love the trail, and I journey with all of you. And God is so rich and so wonderful and so loving and so graceful, so forgiving. I mean, there's just no limit to what God's going to do in our lives. So page 19 says we're supposed to practice these principles in all of our affairs. The third step prayer tells me that when I have victory over these difficulties that are revealed in my column 3 of my inventory, and I start to get a perspective of who I really am and who I'm really not, and who God is and who God is not, that I'm going to have some victory over these difficulties. And when God separates me from this bondage of self, that I get to witness to people for the rest of my days of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. And so tonight, and then on page 55 or page 49, there's another little statement that says that, you know what, when we get righted, when we get in proper perspective, we're no longer going to be the Alpha and the Omega of our lives. We're not going to be the beginning and end. We're not going to be the center of the universe. God is. And we are going to willingly turn our will and our lives over to the care of this loving and powerful and very intimate God. And we are going to become his intelligent agent, his spearhead of his ever advancing creation, a creation that takes you and me in our daily lives, day by day, moment by moment, and uses us to love up people who are suffering, that only you and I, as recovered alcoholics, have a message of depth and weight that could save lives. We could take people to the very throne of God, just like Ebby did with Bill, And even though Bill showed up so much resistance, Abby, I don't want to hear about a loving sway of God. I don't care how loving he is. I don't care how wonderful he is. I don't care how great his guidance is. I don't want it. But the gift of desperation drives us back to open-mindedness. And so by the time I get to page 51, it says the consciousness of the presence of God is going to be it's going to be more important to me than anything else in my life. And on page 55, it says that this spiritual liberation that I see in other people that I've been doubting in the rooms, who are now recovered alcoholics, who have all this incredible love going on and changed life and exhibiting the great fact and the central fact of page 25, they're saying that it was made possible by God. And what did God do? It helped. God literally, if you will, transported them above their problems. Sam Shoemaker used to talk to Bill quite a bit, and Bill was an intellectual skeptic, agnostic, right? And Bill would say, how do I get my hands around this whole God concept? I mean, there's so many facets, and everybody thinks they've got it going on. And the religions of mankind, I don't think so, Sam. And if there's any God at all, it's going to be the devil, because he seems to be boss universal, because he's got the whole world wrapped up. And Sam is saying, Bill, would you just chill out a minute? Will you just simply try to do the will of God as you understand the will of God, and see if you don't like the results? Just try God. For lack of a better term, take on the grand experiment. And one of the early writers that I was introduced to, and I'll throw the book up just for a second if you want to take a screenshot of it, is called Abundant Living. It's by E. Stanley Jones. And this was read by the original 100. All the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm not going to talk about modern literature. I'm talking about literature that the original 100, actually original 80, read. Okay, is the original folks. What did they inspire to? Now, I want to the last part of this context, and we're doing fine. We're only 7 minutes in, but I want to say this is sort of important stuff. I started when we started looking at this big book, and everybody at the Fellowship of the Spirit. By the way, I was introduced to that early on in my sobriety, and I thank God. Don Pritz and the gang started it up in Denver, up in Breckenridge, and I got to go the last time that Don spoke, and in 2004, just before I came out to California. And the love and the care and the teachability of the people that were in that fellowship, I have been forever moved to my heart. And so I identify with all of you. And it's a beautiful, beautiful way of life. And what Don said, he said, sobriety without a solution is cruelty. And solution without love is brutality. And I've never forgotten that after all these years, because unless we have a solution in our lives today, our life experience is going to be very, very cruel to others and to ourselves. Would you guys agree? Thumbs up if you agree with that. When I'm in a place of spiritual disease, I take away from people's lives. I'm an alcoholic illness inventory on page 18. I'm a tornado inventory on page 83. I'm just tearing through people's lives. Look, Ma, the wind stopped blowing. Ain't it grand? Everything's about Pat. And so as I'm going through the big book and I'm turning statements into questions, I'm starting to have an experience. And by the way, the gift that God has given me is I've never chased knowledge for knowledge's sake. I've only chased knowledge to learn more about this relationship I have with God, because I want to experience God deeper. I want to know God deeper than I do today. I want to be used to demonstrate God's love to you deeper and more impactful than I have today. And so I chase authors, I chase volumes, I chase books that could help me with those endeavors. Because I start to go through the big book, and the big book is a signpost. It's like it's a clue, it's a treasure map of topics that we could take in the meditation, that we could take into our step 11 practice. In other words, meditation, just starting out on the very basic, how do I listen to God? There are volumes and volumes and volumes of books that will give me ideas and clues about how the original 100 listened to God. Probably one of the best I've ever read is a simple little volume called When Man Listens, and it's by Cecil Rose. Can everybody see it if you want to take a screenshot? When Man Listens by Cecil Rose. And he has a cool thing. He says, when man listens, God speaks. Pat, when you listen, God's going to talk to you. Hey, Pat, when you obey, God is going to act. God's going to make a path where there is no path. The impossible journey across becomes possible. God never breaks a promise. God never, ever doesn't show up. God always comes through. I have a dear friend of mine who's been one of my sponsees for about almost, 15, 18 years. And he's recently went through a really, really heavy stretch in life. And a couple times he's saying, Pat, I know that God's going to show up, but it's 11:59. It's 11:59. I said, don't worry. Have you heard the clock hit 12? And he goes, nope. I said, don't worry. And I got a call from him a couple weeks ago, and the event that needed to happen in his life happened. And he said, Pat, it was more miraculous than I could have ever dreamed. It was more complete than I could have ever imagined. It was more satisfying to our future for my wife and I than I could have ever desired. Pat, God is amazing. See, God wants to show off in our lives. God's a show off. I put my faith in God, and God comes through because he wants people to know him. All right. And so I'm going through the big book, and I'm reading stuff like this. Bill considers, who does he think Christ is, on page 11. And one of the things that I asked my sponsees, I said, who do you think Christ is? And sometimes the answer comes back, I don't know. I don't have any clues. Says, why don't you check it out? There's books and books and books about who Christ is. Why don't you check it out? Page 47 describes willing to believe as a simple cornerstone on which we're going to start our relationship. Why do they use that term cornerstone? Why don't you check it out? A meditation on that, and then it's going to lead you to some books. And by the way, at the very end of this, I'm going to give you one volume that has all the books that I'm talking about. So don't worry if, I'll give you what I got. Call me. I'll give you my life. I've got a lot of books. I read all the time, and I love it. But, it's not to impress, but I'd love to journey with you, okay? On page 13, Bill calls God his newfound friend, who's going to take away his sins, root and branch. What the heck does that mean? Do you know there's books on that? There's books and books and books. And what does that terminology even mean? And how about this one? Page 19, after such an approach, many take up their bed and walk again. Where did that terminology come from, and what is it talking about? It's actually a biblical reference saying that God did the impossible in a man's life. Does God do the impossible in our lives today? Is there a place in my life today that I feel blocked off from God, that I don't think God could take me further? Is there a place in my life where I can't get over a resentment, that no matter how many times I've inventoried it, I can't get over it? I've got a fear that just keeps on nagging me. I got a habit in relationship that keeps tearing my relationship apart. There are books that we'll talk about that walk me through how to have a God-inspired relationship. Okay, I can't stop. Here you go. The greatest thing in the world. It's by a man named Henry Drummond. It was written I want to say 1884. It was one of the go-to volumes. And by the way, I don't want to overstate that's how thick this volume is. It's only, you can't even call it 40 pages. And it's the story of love, God's love for you and I. See, I believe the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is a love story from those that have recovered to those who are still suffering. And I believe that the Bible is a story of how God has a love story for you and I. Now, it doesn't mean I'm trying to convert anybody to my way of thinking, my concept of God, but I want you to know that I didn't start out where I am today. So be careful of your journey. Be careful of your journey because, God does God stuff. And when God starts showing up, watch out. It gets pretty cool. But this greatest thing in the world is a story about how to show up in relationship lovingly with the power of God. It's out of 1 Corinthians 13, and it's probably one of the most powerful sermons that was ever not preached. That's right, not preached. It was written as a fireside chat with Henry Drummond's best friends, who were all in world famous ministries at the turn of the century that all of Alcoholics Anonymous read on a routine basis. Let me keep going. Page 63 uses the term in the promises, we were reborn. Bill says, my roots, they grasp new soil. Where are these terms coming from? And again, Sam Shoemaker, one of the people that was read openly and lovingly by Alcoholics Anonymous, talks about that very subject of twice born ministers. And the ministers is one of those words that sort of jumps out at us, and I have to set aside my prejudice to the term. I had to when I started to read. And what Sam is saying to Bill Wilson as he wrote this, he was the Episcopal Calvary Episcopal minister in New York, where Ebby and Bill and quite a few of our original gang, they went. And Sam wrote a book about the experiences of people who met God, their life got changed, and what happened as a result. So it's like you get to listen to their stories. There's probably, 15 or 16 stories in that volume. And it tells each of us about the possibilities of what God can do if we give God our lives. What can God do? And it's an amazing journey. Man, I could keep on going. Okay, how about prejudice? How about sensitivity? How about sensitiveness? How about obstinacy, right? Unreasoning prejudice that we have. I wonder if there's any books about how to overcome that. Yeah. E. Stanley Jones has a whole section on what does it look like to have set aside in us those prejudice that are blocking me off from my God experience. E. Stanley Jones, who was read widely by the original 100, he was a guy that was a minister, if you will, in India for over 50 years. He met with Gandhi. He was twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. No lightweight was E. Stanley Jones. And he had a love that was so infectious for God that Indians of the culture wanted to know E. Stanley Jones' God. See, God's about love. God wins hearts not by debate. God wins hearts not by trying to convince Pat that intellectually he makes sense. God wins hearts by changing Pat's life. And Pat shows up in a relationship in Escondido, California, differently with his wife and his child, who lives here now, and her grandbaby and their husband. Pat gets to show up as a sober, recovered man of God who gets to be used by God to be God's intelligent agent and a spearhead of God's ever advancing creation in other people's lives. We get a chance to show up in our businesses where we live and somebody's going through a rough time and we get to pray with them. Because you know what the overwhelming statement about prayer is in the 11th step? Do it. Do it. Well, how do I learn how to pray? What's the right way to pray? What's the right position? Do I have to turn? Do I have to kneel? Do I have to lay down? Hands raised? What do I have to do? Do it. And here's what I've come to understand after doing it for 21 and a half years, maybe almost 22 years, but 21 and a half for sure. The more I pray with God, the more I want to pray with God. The more I pray with God, the more I want to hang out with God. The more I pray with God, the more I want to listen to God. The more I listen to God, the more I want to do what God says. Why? Because there's this cool verse in the Bible that says that God's will is satisfying, it is good, and it is perfect. And I'm a mad dog. I want to find out if that's true. I want to find out if that's true because I knew I rolled myself into the ground living on Pat's will. I want to find out if doing God's will is good and satisfying and perfect. These people in the big book that are saying the consciousness, the presence of God's the most incredibly most important thing in their lives, they make a powerful reason for saying why they have faith. Why don't I take a listen? Why don't I read some books on faith? How do you acquire it? Why don't I read some books on faith and how people experience it? I'm a story person. Give me a story. Give me the theory. Show me a man's life. Show me a woman's life. And so one of the guys, okay, I'm going to go right in the middle because you guys might tune out. I don't blame you if you do. But if you tune out, here's the book that you want to get on Amazon. The book the early AAs read for spiritual growth. And I'm going to repeat it. The books the early AAs read for spiritual growth. And it's by a guy that was an archivist in Hawaii, and he's dead and gone now, but he loved God deeply, and his name was Dick B. And this guy was modern. He's in our era. And so I don't want to tell you that he was an 1800s, 1900s guy. He's not. But what he did, which is beautiful, is book after book after book. These are bibliographies of book after book after book by subject that the original AAers read. And I started going, you know what? If it's good enough for Bill and the gang, if it's good enough for Dr. Bob, if it's good enough for Ann Smith to do morning devotionals, it's good enough for Pat to take a read. And there's another one out there that I never knew about. I always knew about Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. And boy, that was a great bridge for me because it was gentle to me to teach me a little bit about God. But there is another one that they read even more. Sermon on the Mount by a guy named Oswald Chambers. Sermon on the Mount by Oswald Chambers was also the same guy that the chief devotional, besides E. Stanley Jones' Abundant Living, the other chief devotional that they used was a book called My Utmost for His Highest. Somewhere around here. I probably got a copy of it. Here we go. Can you guys see it? My Utmost for His Highest. Fancy title. It means, Pat, give everything you've got. Either God is everything or God is nothing. What's your choice? For His highest. Why? Because I'm going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, and I want God to do God stuff in my life. I want God to obliterate selfish self-centeredness. And by the way, make no mistake about it, These books that I read tell me very clearly that the spiritual malady that we suffer from, which is identified on pages 44, 45, and 52, signposts of my spiritual malady are the bedevilments on page 52. That selfish self-centeredness, that we think is the root. That's the root cause of the bedevilments. That is our spiritual malady. And the book's really clear that I don't have any ability to get rid of it. I could dress it up. I could paint the pig's lips, but the bottom line is it's still there. And the only entity, the only person in the universe that could free me from the bondage of self is who? God. And make no mistake about it, for the rest of our lives, God, because he loves us so much, he will not settle. He wants you too badly. He wants you and I to experience his intimacy. He wants us to experience his love and affection. He wants us to experience his power. And he says, I'm in a war on your behalf, Pat. I am going to obliterate selfish self-centeredness. I'm going to kill it dead. One tentacle at a time that is strangling your heart. I'm going to kill it. And if we look at our lives over our growth in sobriety, we are all changing from one degree to the next, less and less selfish. We have more patience than we used to. We have more love for others than we used to. We can turn our attention to other people's goals and designs and affairs, not our own little designs. We start to see our lives change from the inside out. We don't window dress it. Lack of power is what my dilemma is, and I can't pull off living to the place of philosophical convictions. I can't pull off my moral code. I can't show up honestly and lovingly in a relationship that makes a transformative difference, real help for another human being. You know what real help for another human being is? I take that person to God. I pray with people at my office who do not believe in God. I'm in a COO position of my company, and I'm probably going to get fired someday, and I don't care because God's my employer. I don't care. And I love people. I respect authority. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be arrogant and self-centered about it. But when I see people suffering and I see people in torture, I'm taking them to the source. I say, you know what, Jim, do you mind if I pray for you? Pat, I don't believe in God. I said, I do. It'll be enough for you too. And I start a relationship with Jim about talking to God. Just like my sponsor did with me. Bill T, I don't believe in God anymore. I've given up on God. That's okay. I haven't. I got enough for both of us, Pat. And he taught me how to pray with others who were adversarial to God. It's the coolest thing in the world. With your sponsees, pray with them before the meeting starts, during the meeting when something comes up. At the end of the meetings, finish it with a prayer. If you have a meeting and you have the ability to put it in the format, put in prayer at the beginning, put a prayer at the end. Why? Because prayer is not an event. Prayer is an environment. We live in prayer. We live our days in prayer. In the Bible, it says we move and we have our being, our beingness with God. There's no place I could go where God isn't. So why not talk to him? Well, I'm scared to talk to God. If I tell him what's really going on, he's not going to want to be around me. Really? The God that I'm starting to learn about in life knows all things. I can't pull one over on God. And it's okay because these books, these volumes that I'm reading, I've got all sorts. Soul Surgery tells me from H.A. Walter, another one that was one of the original. This one talks to me about how God is going to remove my spiritual malady. Oxford Group, straight up. Oxford Group's going to show how the original 100 believed in God, the power of God, and the transformative freedom that God offers to take me out of my own torture chamber and put my feet on solid ground. How about this one? Believing in false gods. That's a good one. I Was a Pagan. This is by V.C. Kitchen. He was another one of the originals that they read. And no, this isn't trying to make a treatise on every other religion, but it is saying the following. The big book is misunderstood quite a bit when it says we can go around and basically invent God in our life. And I'm thinking, is that 5 minutes? Oh, thank you. The big book is never saying to Pat, go invent God. And let me ask you a question. If your marriage or your partner is in a death's door, or your marriage is breaking up, or your business is failing, and you got financial ruin hitting you, you've got something that's dogging you that you can't get over, and you are so desperate, and it's so dark, and it's so black in your life, do you really want to be praying to a God you invented by human stage? God says in the big book says about God that the fundamental idea of God's been poured into our hearts. The fundamental idea of God's been poured into our hearts. It also says that God enters our heart. Where was he before? We have to invite him in. Bill says he understood the significance of the cathedral. He said, I wanted and I needed God, and I asked, and guess what God did? God came. And then we have that great deal where it says, if I will draw near to God, God's going to run away? No. When I draw near to God, is God going to point the finger at me and tell me what a miserable, despicable, jailbait, judder, terrible, despicable human being I am? Never. Never. One of the things that I had to get my hands around is this. When I draw near to God, God reveals himself to me. God wants to be known by us. The big book and we agnostics about halfway through the chapter says, you know what? It's flabby goose flesh. Have you guys ever seen a goose without feathers? It is not a pretty sight. Flabby, the skin just hair hangs. If it's windy, it's going like this. It's just babbling back and forth. And it says that if you don't know if you have faith or you doubt whether or not God is, it says it's flabby. If you stay there, it's not saying that you don't start there. I get it. That's where I started, Cornerstone. I'm willing to believe. But it's about growth. It's not about thinking for all the rest of my days in sobriety, I don't know if there's a God. I don't know if God can be known. I don't know any of this. That's not what the big book's saying. The big book is saying God's knowable. Folks, it's controversial these days, which is sort of absurd, but it is. God is knowable. I don't know a billionth of who God is, but I do know God a whole lot better than I knew God 22 years ago. God is knowable, and God is approachable. God wants relation with us. And so the books that I read take me to those places. And I'll give you one modern day book that Henry Nouwen's one of my favorite authors. A lot of you on here know Henry Nouwen, but he wrote a book called The Return of the Prodigal Son, Henry Nouwen. And I'll finish with this. I was given this by a friend of mine in 1995. I didn't get sober until 2002. In 1995, my life was off the rails. In 1995, I had doctors tell me I'm probably going to die if I don't quit drinking. I had doctors telling me that your liver's hit. They're telling me that the slur in your speech you're never going to lose. It's always going to be there because of what you've done to your brain. First wife is leaving me. The second wife is leaving. My 3 children don't want me anymore. My business partners don't want me anymore. And this guy has the audacity to give me some stinking religious book. And I took this religious book and I threw it over in the corner of my room. Do you guys realize that I never read this book until about 2010? Some 15 years later, after I've been sober for, say, 7, 8, 9 years. It's the story of God's rescue plan. It's the story, the love story of God saying, you're too important to me, Pat. I'm not doing this without you. I'm coming after you. You can hide all you want, but I'm going to find you. And it's a good hide and go seek. God is coming after us. God wants us. And when God finds us, he's not trying to condemn us. He says, you belong to me. You have a new identity, a keystone identity, Pat. I get to read books about what does it look like to have God as my father. I get to look at books that teach me about what does God look like as God, my director, my principal, my employer, my creator. Do you realize that none of us are a mistake? We're a masterpiece for God. God, before time began, created every single one of us on this call. You are not a mistake. There is nothing about your life that's a mistake. You are a masterpiece from God himself. And he says, you are mine. I love you. I will go to the ends of the world to find you. I will bring you back. How do I know that? How many of you knew a whole lot about the big book when you first came into the rooms of AA? But yet you stayed sober this period of sobriety that you have now. I'm not talking about relapse, but I'm telling you now that you're sober. How did that happen? Was it your knowledge of the big book? Was it going to 90 meetings in 90 days? Was it calling my sponsor every day? All these things are good. I'm not arguing with any of these. That's not my point. My point is this: the very hand and loving hand and powerful hand of God reached into my torture chamber called Pat's heart, Pat's mind, that was dark and had no hope and was bitter and confused and baffled, overwhelmed and hopeless. And he speaks to the parts of my heart that I could hear, and he says, Pat, I'm rescuing you. You belong to me. Come home. Well, God, I'm not sure if I could do. Come home. I don't know enough. It's okay. I'll teach you. But what if you don't worry, I'm good. But what if you try to tell me, I love you. Come with me. Walk with me and find out if my ways are good, satisfying, and whole. I love you guys. Thanks for the time.
Hands up, and my new friend Shafardine. Come on in.
Hey everybody, my name is Shofar Dean. Very grateful, recovered alcoholic. I got I got to hear what I needed to hear. I'm so grateful just to get the resources so I can continue to get the word out. Love you, Pat. You know how much I love you. We're
Right
so
back
grateful.
at you, buddy.
Man, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, Jill, you are up next, Jill.
There you go. I'm Jill. I'm an alcoholic. That was lovely. I can't stop smiling. I have a question. You mentioned that Bill T talked to you specifically about like praying with people who don't believe or people who are skeptical. And do you mind elaborating on that?
Oh yeah, just real quick. Great to see you, by the way. Um, you know, conversation with God is like you and I are talking. I have a lot of love, and obviously I have a lot of I know that I'm talking to God, so I don't take that lightly. But when I'm talking to, like Jill, if I'm talking to you and you're telling me that you're going through a rough patch in your job, I'm going to say, hey, do you mind if we pray for a second? And you go, okay, yeah, it's okay. I don't really believe in God, but okay. I say, Father, Jill's having a heck of a time in the job. God, I pray that you would do some God stuff in her life and give her some knowledge and wisdom about what steps to take. And God, if there's anything blocking her, would you please show her the way? Thank you. Amen. That'd be a way. That'd be an actual way that I'll share. And I was actually just praying. I don't know if you have a rough time in your job. I was just praying for you. I was just loving on you.
Thank you, Pat.
You bet.
Ferdinand, please come in.
Hey guys, glad to be here. Ferdinand Paulus over alcohol. Pat, that was awesome. Your share just reminded me of the fact that I don't graduate from this program because there's so much for me to learn and to research and to dig for spiritual gems. That's what my late dad used to describe it. So since you read a lot, why don't you give me a brief description of when what's the best circumstances of when you read and meditate? Like, it's an evening, morning. What works best for you? Since obviously you read a lot. And thanks for your sharing your service.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. You know, well, you asked like what are my spiritual practices for reading, and I read usually early in the morning before anybody can interrupt me, like 5 o'clock, 5:15, and I get a good solid hour and a half before anybody's really grousing around in my work, and it's also a time where like I in the Bible, like if you take a look at my Bible, right? So I'll read that a bunch. And I started doing that, 20 some years ago. And the reason was, Ferdinand, is that Dr. Bob did that and Ann did that. And so they did it early in the morning. So I figured if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. And it works well for me. Late at night, I fall asleep. I'm good for 3 or 4 pages and I fall asleep. And that's part of my practice. There's more to it, but that's part of the practice. You bet.
Before Linda comes in, I want to just say that if you are having trouble wrapping your mind around the word God, use whatever word works for you. The source,
Yeah, great point. Great point.
creator, anything. But I want people to put their hands up and ask Pat questions. Pat walked us through page number by page number all of these places in the big book that talk about our spiritual experience. So,
hmm
Linda, you're up next. Come on in.
Thanks, Solace. Hi, everybody. Linda Alcoholic. Thank you so much, Fellowship of the Spirit and Pat. I am just like, woo, woo. But, and I just thank you. Thank you for sharing the spirit that is in you with all of our spirits. You were a big part of the shift for me and this continued shift in this relationship, this absolute beautiful relationship with God. So I'm just, I have a question. Would you, I think about when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, would you, in a brief way or whatever, kind of give it wasn't always like this. It wasn't always like this for you. I remember when I did the 24 hours a day and daily reflections and kind of close them up. And so, kind of if you could, like
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Super question, Linda. And by the way, my true invitation to everybody is wherever you're at, it doesn't matter. Start there, because I couldn't say the word God for years. I couldn't go into a church building for probably the first 4 years of my sobriety. I would physically get ill to go inside of a church building. Okay. So what my sponsor did with me, he said, Pat, there's over 400 times that the word God or a derivation of God's name is used in the big book. Go find them and see what they mean to you. Infinite, spirit of the universe. I could go, well, there's a bunch, but if you go into We Agnostics, just take the chapter We Agnostics, and every time it uses a terminology for higher power, by the way, higher power is used twice in the big book. Lovingly, it's not a bad thing. God is our higher power. I think he's just fine and dandy with that being called his name. I know a lot of people that I fellowship with, I call my brothers, they call God higher power. I have some people, my second sponsor used to call God the big G. There's all sorts of names. I don't think God wants us to come towards him. Infinite power, spirit of the universe. Bill called him at one point the czar of the heavens. Wherever you start, that's what it is. And in Bill's story and in We Agnostics and in A Vision for You, all those chapters have lots and lots and lots. There's over 400 instances where God's name is used, or a derivation of God's name, spirit, friend. That's where I had to start. I couldn't call God God. The first consciousness was using the word friend. What's my concept of friend? That's where I started. Saved my life, by the way. Saved my life. Great question, Linda.
Thank you. We've got 4 people. We've got 6 minutes. Come on, we can do it. Pat, you're up next.
Thank you very much, Alice. Pat Olson, alcoholic. Pat, I'm overwhelmed. Just overwhelmed. I have a sponsees in this meeting. One of them texted me and said, prayer is not an event. Prayer is an environment. We live in prayer. And I feel like that I'm just glued to the screen here, that practicing the presence of God, practicing living in
Brother Lawrence, they read them.
Yeah. It's really coming to life. And I just want to thank you for that. And one question, sobriety without a solution is cruelty. What was the line after that?
Solution without love is brutality.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That's
so
Don P. That guy was one of the most loving human beings you'd ever want to meet.
Love Don. Yes. Thank you so much for referencing him. God bless you.
Absolutely. He gets all the credit.
Natalie, come on in.
Hey everyone. I'm gonna try to talk fast. Hi, I'm Natalie, recovered alcoholic and addict, and Pat, that was amazing. So this is my question. I'm currently in my mad dog stage where I've just, gained access to God, and I
I'll
want
never ever lose it.
I'm reading everything. I'm buying all the books, and I'm only reading them halfway because I want the next book. So I'm just devouring all this literature. And did you ever have that phase when you were in that place, and how did you balance it out? And do you find that by doing that, I'm blocking God from doing God stuff when I'm busy consuming all the spiritual literature? I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. Sam Shoemaker used to tell Bill, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and do whatever you want. In other words, he was saying that if you fall in love with God, if you fall in love with your higher power, God's going to have his way with you on a daily basis. That's step 11, practice of praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out. I don't worry about it today at all. If I'm in a binge reading phase of 2 or 3 books, by the way, I'm usually reading 6 or 7 books at the same time, all the time. Now, that doesn't mean anything. I want to say this clearly. If you're not a reader, it's not about the reading. It's about following some folks that have pointed the way to having a deeper relationship with God that you're curious about, and go talk to them. I had a Native Indian American Chippewa Red Path tradition that I still use, and I had 3 brain clots in my head last year. And the Chippewa Indian Red Path practice of Adaning was instrumental in me getting through 72 hours.
Thank you, Alice. I'm Sarah. I'm an alcoholic. Pat, so you had said at one point, Corinthians in the Bible, what was that?
You hear it, you'll hear it at the weddings sometimes, Sarah. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And the book is called, I'll put it back up here. Here you go.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, it's the first hit you'll get with Amazon. It's a real popular read. Real popular.
Thank you, Pat.
You'll love it.
I don't know if
Alice.
is Alice frozen?
No, she just muted.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for coming in. I really appreciate your question. And Pat, we did it. We got all of the questions in. I just want to turn it back over to Michelle, and I want to remind people that Pat talked about it as a love story. Pat talked about it as falling in love. So, Pat, I love you. Hopefully I'll get to see you in person soon. Michelle, back to you.
Thank you.